from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Collins.
Busy one this evening, coming up later.
They might see their parent be life and soul at a party when everyone's there. When the door closes, it's the kids that see the worst of it, because the act stops.
Growing up with addicted parents, how does that pan out? How do you cope with essentially being rudderless as a child? We'll look at that one a little later, plus this.
I will not be taking Pakistani and Indian people where the nationality consumes a lot of curry. The vast majority of people agree with the action I've taken.
Yeah, really? I don't think that's necessarily true. We'll look at rogue landlords, rogue tenants as well in just a little bit, but we start here.
Trust in democratic politics will not be strengthened if anyone now tries to argue you voted Brexit partly for a better funded health service, but precisely because of Brexit, you now can't have one.
Also looking at where Theresa May goes next in what seriously now looks like a government in crisis. Just before we move into the mysterious goings-on in the minds of Simon Stevens, he's the head of the NHS. Let's recap on that big news from this evening. Theresa May has lost a second cabinet minister in under a week. Priti Patel resigned. We all know what that really means after revelations that she breached the ministerial code. I would suggest, as far as breaches go, this was pretty substantial stuff. She was ordered back from an official trip to Africa by the Prime Minister and summoned to Downing Street over the row. Let's speak to the political journalist at The Times, Henry Zeffman. Evening to you, Henry.
Hi, Ian.
The writing, of course, was on the wall, I would guess, the moment she got that phone call saying, "Can you come back?"
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it may even have been on the wall before that. I mean, you say she went for revelations that she breached the ministerial code. I mean, the truth is that the ministerial code doesn't really cover what to do if a government minister conducts freelance diplomacy abroad, because it's such a sort of ridiculous notion that the civil servants who drafted it sort of understandably never really thought to cover what to do in that eventuality.
So no minister is going to suddenly have an impromptu meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, I guess, was their thinking.
You'd think so, although now future Prime Ministers might have to consider it. And the reason she really had to go in the end was because once it became clear that Priti Patel had done this, and it is, very, very serious, Downing Street and Theresa May asked her to come clean and tell them how many meetings she'd had and with who. And on Monday, Priti Patel had to release quite an embarrassing statement saying, here are the 12 meetings I had on a apparent family holiday to Israel in August. But the problem is that left off a couple of meetings that she'd then had, again, with Israeli officials without telling the government in September. And that was the final straw for Downing Street. That was when they said, you have just not met the standard of honesty we require from a government minister, and you're going to have to go.
What on earth was her thinking here, Henry? I mean, bearing in mind, it was most extraordinary, as you say, that this happened at all. But then, given the opportunity to fess up, she missed two pretty substantial meetings from the list, which is almost akin to telling porky pies to the PM.
It is almost akin to that. I mean, what was she thinking? That's the question that has stumped Westminster today. I don't know. She is, on the wing of the Conservative Party, which is supportive of, the Israeli state's right to defend itself within secure borders and so on. But really what this has come down to isn't a question about the rights and wrongs of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's just a question of honesty and of, behaving as is right and proper as a minister in a government bound by collective responsibility. And those are the grounds on which Theresa May has, found her not fit to serve.
Was there anything within the specifics that was perhaps stood out? I'm thinking of the Golan Heights region, of course, which is particularly controversial, a place she visited and not even recognised by this country as Israel's right to occupy.
So that was one of the things which came out after Priti Patel told Downing Street. She told them everything that she had done. So Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, reported this morning that as well as the 12 meetings Priti Patel had disclosed, she'd also visited an Israeli Defence Forces hospital in the Golan Heights. Now, Israel sees that as part of Israel. The British government sees that as occupied Syria. Now, again, whatever the rights and wrongs of that, there may be people in the British government who don't think it is right to see that as occupied Syria, but they still wouldn't, certainly not without prior approval, travel there and visit a hospital, and then even less would they do that without telling the Prime Minister or the Foreign Office. It's just extraordinary.
Why do you think the Jewish Chronicle were claiming that the Prime Minister and others did know about these meetings?
It's a really interesting story. We've not quite got to the bottom of that yet. I mean, it's worth saying that Downing Street vociferously denies that they were aware of the meetings before they said they were. There is certainly a suggestion here of a sort of policy tension between Priti Patel and parts of the Conservative Party and the Foreign Office, which perhaps has a slightly more dovish, if you will, stance on this conflict. But it's certainly not yet clear, what the sort of truth is in the idea that Downing Street agreed with Priti Patel that they shouldn't tell the Foreign Office about some of these meetings. Finally, Henry, who replaces Priti Patel? We don't know. It will happen tomorrow, we're told. It's probably going to be a limited one-in, one-out reshuffle, and that's because, this is almost 24 hours to the minute. A whole week to the minute that Michael Fallon had to resign as Defence Secretary. Sure. The current mood of Westminster is that, who knows who might have to go next. Theresa May's deputy, Damien Green, is still under investigation from the Cabinet Office. Theresa May certainly isn't going to conduct a wide-ranging reshuffle without first being aware of how many other ministers might have to go. Henry, thank you, sir. Henry Zeffman, political reporter at The Times. And a little later, we'll look into what next for Theresa May. What does this mean for the Prime Minister's current administration? We'll look at that on LBC later.
Iain Collins on LBC.
Now, the health service should get the cash boost it was promised during the EU referendum. This is the boss of NHS England, Simon Stevens, who used controversial claims used by the Vote Leave campaign that the NHS could benefit from the £350 million a week to put the case for more money in a major speech. I almost don't know where to begin as to what is wrong with what he said here. Bearing in mind, we all, I suppose, I assume all, endorse his spirit of his speech that the NHS will need more money. He talks about growing waiting lists, substantially growing over the next 4 or 5 years. But it's this curious comparison that he used in order to make the claim. Let's have a listen to the head of the NHS, Simon Stevens, speaking earlier today.
The NHS wasn't on the ballot paper, but it was on the ballot bus. Vote Leave for a better funded health service, £350 million a week. By the end of the next financial year for the NHS, March 2019, the United Kingdom will have left the European Union. Trust in democratic politics will not be strengthened if anyone now tries to argue, you voted Brexit partly for a better funded health service, but precisely because of Brexit, you now can't have one. A modern NHS is itself part of the practical answer to the deep social concerns that gave rise to Brexit.
Well, we don't certainly dispute the urgency for NHS assistance, but let's just examine this £350 million a week. This has bugged me forever, in fact. It's only bugged me post the referendum because it never really came up pre the referendum, which is why I'm going to ask this question to start with. Did anyone vote to leave the EU based on a slogan on the side of a bus? 0345 6060 973. Is there anyone that went to the ballot box last year to decide whether you wanted to remain or leave the EU based on what you saw written on the side of a bus? Now, there's a couple of points on this. The bus, to my knowledge, wasn't exactly an image that was thrown around the TV screens every single day. Momentarily, it was part of the Leave campaign. So there's point number one. The Leave campaign was an independent campaigning organisation. It was not the government. They were not in a position to carry out any kind of claim because they weren't the government. They were just a campaign organisation. And thirdly, and I say this in fairness to the Leave campaign, which I did not endorse, This was not, as far as I can see, a pledge at all. It was an analogy, if you like. It was more in that department than anything else. This was an organisation essentially suggesting that this is the kind of money that we send to the EU. They got that a little wrong, of course, because they didn't incorporate the rebate. Why not keep it here? That's it, really, isn't it? Why not keep the money here? There's no pledge, no promise. They weren't in a position to promise anything. They were merely making a slogan, a campaign to highlight the enormity of the funds that go to the EU and how it could be better spent over here. It was just an idea, if you like. Not a promise, not a pledge. They could not have possibly made that promise or pledge. Remember, the government of the day were arguing the very opposite case to this. So why Simon Stevens, who I think slightly lost the plot on this one, thinks for 1 second that the government would be in any position to give him this magic amount of money, even putting aside the fact we haven't yet left the EU, it wasn't the government that was making the claim. 0345 6060 973. This one comes up time and time again. And I'll say this. Prior to the EU referendum, I don't remember doing a single phone-in where this came up and anyone suggested to me that they were going to vote to leave because they wanted £350 million a week to go to the NHS. I never heard anyone... I never interviewed anyone from any campaign that said it in those terms. I never spoke to a single caller who believed that that was the turning point for them, the tipping point. I wasn't sure what to do, but now I think there's going to be three. You'd have to be, frankly, a moron to think that a campaigning organisation was in any position to promise that sort of pledge in the first place, because they weren't. And everybody knows they weren't, which is probably why it never once came up as a concern or an issue or something that was going to turn someone's vote one way or the other. Never once. It was only afterwards that sort of disgruntled Remainers decided to pull this one out the bag and say everybody's been lied to because of a bus that Boris Johnson had his photograph taken next to. 0345 6060 973. I'm willing to be proved wrong on this. If you can tell me that you did vote Brexit based on what was written on the side of a bus, there's a lot of B's in this sentence, then I'm all ears. Voting for Brexit based on a bus, is that you? 0345 6060 973. I'm guessing few people will fess up to that, well, partly because I don't think anybody did, but few people, even if there is a rare person out there, because it would be an extraordinary reasoning behind your vote. Just think about it. It was a campaign organisation. Anyone with a brain would look at any political campaign and realise that campaigns are full of analogies and metaphors and what-ifs and a bit of mischief thrown in as well. And this was no exception. Essentially saying, look, this is the amount that goes in that direction, roughly, wasn't quite true, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt on that, and this is what we could do with it here. An pure and simple. 0345 6060 973. Did anyone seriously think that you were going to wake up the next day or sometime after the referendum and be told by a sitting Prime Minister, well, it's all good news because we've got £350 million we're going to put into the NHS? I mean, that would just be extraordinary. You probably don't even have the right to vote, or you shouldn't have the right to vote, if you actually seriously thought that was going to be the case. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Late Nights with Iain Collins, LBC.
Last time on the Nigel Farage Show.
Personally, I think that May should have sacked her if she wants to try and get some strength back in her leadership. Though, to be frank, I think it's all too late. I think she's lost all credibility. She doesn't look like a leader in the country. She doesn't look like the boss of a cabinet. And in Brussels, well, frankly, we become a laughingstock, and that's the only way I can possibly put it.
5 days of Farage. Monday to Thursday evenings from 7 and Sunday mornings from 10. The Nigel Farage Show. Only on LBC.
At participating Ford dealers, you can get your car a Ford Motorcraft service for just £149. And that's not a more or less price. It's a spot-on, no hidden extras price. Book your Ford Motorcraft service at ford.co.uk or visit your local dealer.
Prices recommended retail price including parts, labour and VAT. Terms and conditions apply.
From the elegant palazzos of the aristocratic port city of Trieste to the tiny narrow streets and stacked houses dug into rocks in Matera to the gently rolling hills of Le Longhe in Piedmont, famous for Barolo and white truffles, and the grand piazzas of Catania overlooking majestic Mount Etna, Italy is the perfect short break destination at any time of the year. See, taste, discover authentic Italy. For inspiration on where to visit on your Italian short break, go to italia.it.
Welcome to London's exquisite Indian dining experience, Marla Restaurant. The finest North Indian cuisine in the most charming setting. Find us in the heart of one of London's divine hidden gems, St Catherine's Dock. Marla Restaurant. Visit us in St Catherine's Dock or go to marlarestaurant.co.uk.
Marla. Discover a jewel in London's secret paradise.
£27 billion has already been paid back for missold PPI. Yet thousands of people are still owed millions. Have you made your claim? At PPI Hotline, what we can do is check for free to see if you had PPI on bank loans or credit cards. And if your PPI was missold, we'll help you claim back what you could be owed. Text CLAIM to 82222.
PPI Hotline. Text CLAIM to 82222.
Text will be charged at your standard network rate.
Getting business finance can be a hard nut to crack. But with Market Invoice, it's a piece of cake. Flexible business loans and invoice finance to keep your business thriving. And our customer service is the cherry on top. Let's make it happen. Market Invoice. Easy as pie. Find out more at marketinvoice.com.
I put her tea out while she rabbits on about Hannah's birthday party. I make sure the chips aren't touching the fish fingers, and she gets something from the jar for eating all her peas. She needn't know what a struggle it was getting up at 2 p.m. How hard it is to avoid the ulcers when I brush my teeth, or how it feels taking 13 tablets a day. Because I might have cancer, but the most important thing is that I'm Sophie's mum.
A mum with cancer is still a mum. Our support line is here to help you get through the hard days. Because life with cancer is still life, and we're here to help you live it. We are Macmillan Cancer Support.
Get your Ford ready for winter with a Motorcraft service for just £149 at participating Ford dealers. Book at ford.co.uk. Price is recommended retail price.
Late nights with Iain Collins on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
I'll chat to Bella in just a second. The infamous bus, the £350 million bus, and there was the poster campaign and leaflets and stuff that went along with that. Now, I don't think I've got this wrong, because working in a newsroom does give you a little bit of an advantage in that you can very easily check stuff. That campaign went on for flipping years, didn't it? I mean, it's the minute we heard of a man called Nigel Farage, the campaign was up and running. But the campaign proper, the sort of 6 to 8 weeks leading up to that referendum, the battle bus stroke poster campaign of the 350. We're talking about this now as if this dominated the Leave campaign. And it absolutely did not. I promise you, it did not. It didn't happen in the first section of the campaign. It was something that was focused on for a couple of days, and then they moved on to something else. And it's interesting. If you want to see what revisionism looks like, here's an email from Miles, who says the pledge on the side of the bus was certainly a factor for many people who voted Leave. Well, I said at the beginning, I never spoke to anyone, not a single person, in doing probably hundreds of debates who said, I'm voting because I want to give 350 million quid to the NHS. Had that been the case, then my first response would have been, well, that's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's just a kind of a pledge, a suggestion, if you like, not actually a pledge. Miles says they fell for fake figures and, frankly, the BS which Bozo and Gove and Farage were throwing out. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Nigel Farage wasn't even part of that campaign. Nigel Farage never once made that claim. He wasn't even part of the Vote Leave campaign. He was part of a completely different campaign organisation and never stood by the bus. So you see how these kind of stories get thrown around and twisted. There were signs and campaign events around the UK, and I quote, "Let's give our NHS the £350 we send to the EU every week." That's right. That's a suggestion. Let's give that kind of money to this kind of thing. The people saying it were in no position to make it happen. So either you think that the people saying it were in a position to make it happen, i.e. people who weren't even in government, so either you believe that, which would be deeply worrying, or you believe the whole thing, which would be even more worrying. You actually believe they were going to do it. It just doesn't make any sense. Miles goes further and says, all those who pledge this need to be held to account and face the legal system. Why? Why would you face the legal system for saying, look, why don't we give this sort of money to the NHS? Why wouldn't that be a good thing? Graham says the myth of the 350 million quid being pledged to the NHS keeps on growing. Anyone who knows how to use their brain knows it was never a promise. As the thinkers among us know, we were told it could be spent on the NHS among other things. Yes, you don't take every... Unless you're some kind of brainwashed buffoon, you wouldn't take every letter or point that's written on a campaign slogan or a leaflet on any side of the argument. Remember George Osborne told us that a loaf of bread was going to cost £357 the next day. There'd have to be an emergency budget. The Great Plague was going to return immediately. Nigel Farage was going to turn up and haunt your house. All sorts of things were told by each side on these things. And you have to use your own noggin and take from that what you think is a firm promise and what you believe to be an analogy on behalf of a campaign organisation. Zishan is in Bristol. Hello.
Hello there. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. What are your thoughts?
I'm just calling to say that, unfortunately, my parents, who voted to leave, they actually, at the time of the referendum, they actually told me that part of the reason that they're going to vote for leave is the fact that the NHS will be £350 million better off. I couldn't believe it. I tried to explain to them that this is a campaign slogan and it's nonsense, absolute nonsense. But they were adamant. And surprisingly, the place where I used to work, the average age of people there is probably about 45. 45 years old, and predominantly a lot of people there were voting for Brexit, and I heard the same thing from a lot of people there as well. And I think that kind of sums up.
Why would they? By the way, why would they think that when at the same time there were enough politicians on the other side of the debate pointing out back then that it couldn't possibly be true?
Oh well. This is exactly what I said to a lot of the people that I know and my parents alike, and the reply I got was, well, they are going to say that, aren't they? Because they want to remain and they're pro-EU and they want Europe to have control over everything. So it was a lot of disinformation, which was quite evident for anybody.
Doesn't that happen at any election, isn't there? You have to kind of pick the bones out yourself of what you think is bona fide and what you think might be a bit of mischief.
Yeah, of course. And I think, like, common sense, well, if most people have it, will understand that it is purely a campaign slogan. There's no fact to that figure. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen whether you leave or remain. But, I mean, common sense just seemed to have gone out the window altogether. And to be fair, not just Brexiters, the Remainers as well were coming up with their own crazy ideas out it all. So, in fairness, but it is shocking.
It is. Zishan, thank you for that. Starting us off, 0345 6060 I'll talk to Bella in just a second. It is rather interesting that despite what he said about his own parents, I don't think I took one single call from anyone who ever said and Tom, my producer, is nodding in agreement here. We would certainly remember it for a couple of reasons, because it would be such a howler of something for someone to fall for if they really thought it was a literal thing. But I would have argued against it. There's no way you could forget that. But I think more than anything, it wasn't the huge part of the Leave campaign. The Leave campaign was about so many other things. There was more of a focus on Nigel Farage than there was on many other of the politicians. At some point within that campaign, Boris Johnson became a bit of a figurehead with his sort of Independence Day speech at, I think it was Wembley, wasn't it, that particular event took place. There were lots of different things that took up time. In any of those debates, by the way, the one I just mentioned with Boris Johnson, I didn't once hear him say, we are going to give 350 million quid to the NHS. Because it was never kind of advertised in that spirit, really. But you know what? Here's the thing. In fact, you could argue that the spirit of that message is kind of true. You could. It's not 350 million. It's about 250 odd million, I think, a week, because there's rebates and all the rest of it. But total control over the budget would mean you could put more money into the NHS. That is actually a statement of fact. You couldn't put a full 350 million, because there isn't 350 million, and it would be rather strange if you put all your eggs into one basket, as important as the NHS might be. Bella in Wood Green, what are you thinking, Bella? Good evening.
Hello, good evening. I'm sorry, I might be a bit emotional because it's my first time when I'm speaking on radio.
Well, you're sounding fine so far, sir. Welcome.
Good. You know what I think? I personally think that this figure on the radio was actually a good starter. I mean, people were kind of looking at it, thinking that if Brexit happens, it could actually help NHS, or could save NHS in a way, because they were saying, but what was saying on the bus, it was actually that 350 million pounds could go to NHS, but they never said they will go to NHS. So from could,
well, they said let's give that, but you can still, from a political campaigning point of view, even let's give it's sort of, why don't we do this instead of that? It's sort of, it's in that spirit, not we are definitely going to, because it was being said by people who couldn't definitely do anything.
Yeah, but I understand this, but now, you see, from let's give to NHS 350 million pounds. So probably people did really think that this is going to happen, but it never did. So I kind of get the feeling, because I was listening to LBC today, so I kind of get the feeling that some people are kind of disappointed that this doesn't really happen. And myself, living in the UK, you know, I love this country like my own country. I came here just about 5 years ago with nothing in my pocket, and I made a life, and I'm grateful for what this country did for me and what I've managed to do here. And I really, really hope that this would go well for everyone. So I'm just thinking that, you know, sometimes I think that in a way we are kind of casualties of a political game, and it's not. I don't know if some people voted for Brexit for different reasons, and I can understand people some people voted for immigration, some people voted because probably this figure. You know, some people many people had different ways of voting for Brexit, but I think this 350 million pounds, it was a kind of a start.
Well, I think. Listen, Bella, it was a great first call, by the way. Very good, thank you, sir, for that. If you look at both campaigns, not just in this, but in pretty much any election, there's always all sorts of things. You have to separate the wheat from the chaff. You have to use your own noggin. These are not the Oracle of Delphi, these parties, who are dispensing factual wisdom cast literally in tablets of stone. I mean, this is not the case. You look at what they're saying, you analyse it yourself, you compare it to other organisations, you do your own bit of research. That is part of the democratic process, by the way. You look at it and say, well, does that make sense? Does that sound believable to you? Actually, the bit I did believe was George Osborne's emergency budget. I thought, well, that probably would be the case, wouldn't it? If you do something as grand as leave the EU, then it would sort of make sense. There must be a system in place where they will have to sit there and crunch the numbers in a very different way from now going forwards. Didn't happen. 0345 6060 973. Also to come this evening.
I will not be taking Pakistani and Indian people where the nationality consumes a lot of curry. The vast majority of people agree with the action I've taken.
Wow. We've been in this territory with this landlord before, but he's back again because he's been told to ditch his policy where he banned Indian and Pakistani tenants because of the smell of curry. Well, look specifically at his points when he says people agree with me, because curiously, the last time we did this, I had a switchboard full of people who were Indian or Pakistani saying, I agree with him, which is, I didn't quite expect. It didn't quite go the way I wanted it to go, frankly, that phone-in. I was going to try and get all left-wing and indignant on everybody. So I had the wind blown right out my sails that night. Nonetheless, the wider issue of sort of landlord versus tenant, the good versus the bad, but who is the good and who is the bad? We'll look at that one a little later. Plus, where next for Theresa May's government? She's looking to replace her second cabinet minister in a week after Priti Patel resigns. Henry Hill is the assistant editor at Conservative Home. He'll bring us more on this in just a few moments. If you're hanging on, don't go away. I'll speak to Matt, Tom, Angela, David, Saf, Steve and others with you guys shortly. It's 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Late Nights with Ian Collins. LBC, the news headlines now at 10:30 from Paul Smith.
The International Development Secretary has been forced to resign over unauthorised meetings with Israeli political figures, saying her actions fell short of the standards of a minister. Priti Patel is the second member of the cabinet to stand down in a week. A woman has accused Kevin Spacey of sexually assaulting her 18-year-old son. She said the actor bought him drink after drink in Massachusetts last year. It's being reported tonight editors of two of Scotland's most recognisable newspapers are to leave their posts. Graham Smith, editor of the Herald, and Graham Shields, Evening Times editor, will both quit next month. LBC weather: rain spreading across the UK tonight from the northwest, heavy at times, mostly dry, clear, cold and frosty elsewhere, an overnight low of just 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
At participating Ford dealers, you can get your car a Ford Motorcraft service for just £149. And that's not a more or less price, it's a spot-on, no hidden extras price. Book your Ford Motorcraft service at ford.co.uk or visit your local dealer.
Prices recommended retail price including parts, labour and VAT. Terms and conditions apply.
I know who Charlene married. I know what a flux capacitor does. I know how to write hello on a calculator. And I know how to do the big fish, little fish. But I don't know my state pension.
Find out more